Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and one actor as we try to make the world of work a little bit better. And today, LindaAnn, you're going to continue our discussion. And today, we're going to talk about alignment for engagement, exploring the connection between employee alignment and engagement. I am thrilled that we're going to actually look at this today because throughout my career, I've been, it's been top down. You're doing training. And that's all they ever give you, and you don't know why we're doing the training. There doesn't seem to be any alignment. It's just from the gods down to us little people. So hopefully we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Well, yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it all comes together. Well, and I think that's part of the issue in a lot of companies. It doesn't always come together, right? And there's no completion of the circle of communication. So I put in a couple of articles in the chat, so hopefully you all can see them. Basically, what they go over is that they confirm that there is an intrinsic link between employee alignment and employee engagement, right? And they say that there's real dearth of empirical data, but they did the research there, and it shows that there's a significant correlation. Now, when you look at the connection of employee alignment to employee engagement, there's let's talk about it for a minute, what each of those mean, right? So when you're looking at employee alignment, that's when there's a greater likelihood that the organization as a whole will meet their objectives, and it's when the employees understand the why of the organization, right? And they understand all the pieces down. Now, the reason that I find that as a real gift in our workforce today is because if you look at Gen Z and millennials, especially Gen Z and the upcomers, they are looking for purpose in their work, right? They aren't doing it for the paycheck. And they are looking for how to contribute to something greater than themselves. They also want mental health, and they also want, job satisfaction and things like that. But when you can show them how coming to work every day contributes to something greater than themselves, that's a win on both sides. Additionally, if you've done the work with the employees to help them identify what they want from their career, what's their ultimate goal, what's their dream, then, and create that career plan, outline, what the steps it's going to take and the interim goals and all those kinds of things. You can start marrying what they're trying to achieve for themselves to what the organization is trying to achieve as a whole. And so when you come to work, you're not just serving the company, you're moving your own goals and career forward. So that's a lot more motivating. When I taught seventh grade, I felt like I was lucky. I taught science and health, and it was really teaching them about themselves, right? And I thought, if I can't motivate you to learn about yourself, then thank God I'm not teaching math or English. And so I look at this in that light, that, if you're working with, let's move you forward and at the same time accomplish our organizational goals, that's a win-win for everybody. Unfortunately, only a little over 20% worldwide and a little over 30% nationwide here in the US of employees are engaged, right? So that leaves 70 to 80% of the workforce that's not engaged. If you're working with engaged employees, they tend to be 15 to 20% more productive than the disengaged. So think about this as an organization. What if 70 to 80% of your company was 20% more productive? What would that mean to your organization? What would that mean to your bottom line?
That would mean you could go to a 4-day work week, which a lot of people are now looking at, and it wouldn't affect your productivity at all.
Exactly.
Do you
So
think
I'd like
this?
to see, I mean, I'm sure you have questions because you're always so great at generating the questions for us to move this conversation along. But, to the panel, I'd love to know what you're seeing as the resistance and the difficulty in making that marriage happen.
Right. There really just seems to be a lack of knowledge about this because, looking around me, when I look at leadership, they're not evil people for the most part who, just want to use their employees and see them as a widget where, when it's worn out, we'll replace it. They are good people who want to see their employees grow. But is this a new brand of leadership or a new style of leadership that we really need to get organizations to engage? And that, if we have a leader who really wants to see the employees' engagement increases and to be aligned, we're talking about increasing productivity by 20% here. So is this a new style of leadership that really needs to be embraced?
I don't think it's a new style of leadership, honestly. I think first that we talked about a couple weeks ago, that link that where leaders are not held accountable for creating that alignment, right? They're not
Right.
taught that piece and they're not doing that piece. So that's one thing, right? And I think there's been a concept or for a long time that you get this title of leader, but it doesn't really have a job description as right as such. There aren't tasks or responsibilities that go with that, and people need to understand that leadership is a job role. So you have to look at it as any other job description and component and understand that leadership is work and you have to accept that it's work and work at it every day.
I constantly see you go on LinkedIn and there's new titles all the time of people and what they're doing. Is anyone sort of specializing in their, an alignment and engagement coach or facilitator? Everyone puts their hands up.
I do that.
Is
That's
that
why
part
I
of your
have it.
branding?
We're doing these podcasts. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, LindaAnn. Natasha, I see your hand up. Let's go to you first, then Jacqueline, we'll over to you. Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Great topic for today. Unfortunately, I was not here last week, but to LindaAnn's point.
Oh, Natasha, you just muted yourself.
My apologies. Here I go. Yes, to LindaAnn's point, and maybe the point that many of you made last week, a lot of it has to deal with the fact that a lot of managers are not trained to have these conversations. But coming from a HR background, that is my experience here, it is not just the training of managers to be able to have those conversations, but it's also the economic and financial times that we're evolving in, where Gen X and boomers who had to make a 24-hour shift in their delivery and who they've shown up as for the past how many decades that they've been working, they've had to change that persona overnight to talk about development, to talk about the things that matter to employees that they never received in the workplace. And they never really had to build those muscles or, manage in the workplace. And so now we're in a landscape where the employer has the power again, and they can slide back to their old habits of, okay, you come here to do your work, and in exchange, you get a paycheck. And I think that the education still needs to take place, the training needs to take place, but also there is sadly a level of accountability that employees have to take, in that if you are not receiving the alignment that you're looking for, the development that you're looking for, maybe you need to go find it elsewhere. And that is the realization that a lot of employers just simply have to face. And I think that if they're not hiring, or if they're not listening to the right HR practitioners, or they're not hiring IO practitioners to be able to guide them, lead them, and train them, then they really have to either do away with the language that pretends that they're working towards that, because the actions don't match up.
You're absolutely right. And thank you very much for that, because I think we're once again going to see employers going, why are all my employees leaving? And and you better open your eyes. Thank you very much, Natasha. Jacqueline, let's go to you.
Yes, thank you. I've done the bulk of my work in the IO field has been in the employee engagement space. So super excited for this conversation and bummed that I missed the last. Totally agree with the training of the leaders. And I have this graphic that I use when I'm talking to leaders, and especially leaders of leaders, about this change curve that you've got to do when you go from an individual contributor and you are the do it person and you're likely the high performer, and people say, oh, they were great at creating widgets. Now they can manage others creating widgets, and that's not the same skill set. And what I have mostly studied and followed in my engagement work is self-determination theory that has these three parts of competency, relatedness, and autonomy. And if you think about being a leader, and especially a new leader, and thinking about what you fear most, many, not all, a lot of times what I see is leaders having fear of this competency of their team, the relatedness, the team members grouping together and maybe forming a coalition against them, or the autonomy piece, which these all fold really nicely into when we're all aligned and we're all working towards the same goal. And now me as an employee can use my competencies, can use my connections, can have autonomy in how I move us all towards the goal. But the leader has to allow themselves to take a step back and not have to control every situation, and allow people and kind of lift them up to use their skills and do their best work. And I think, to me, that's the ticket.
Well, let me ask you, because there can be pushback from leaders. I imagine you get it all the time. And I always thought it was things like, well, it's going to cost us too much. But is the base of a lot of what you're seeing, is that actual just fear of not knowing, fear of leading? Oh my God, they are going to gang up on me.
I think that it is not as conscious as what we might kind of perceive or how we might think about it. But I do see that kind of come to life when, and I think I see it a lot through, I have to control things. I have to control who my employee talks to in this organization. That's one of the top things I've seen as far as that fear. Like, don't reach out to that person. That's not your role. Stay in your lane. I got this. And then I flood myself with work and I make a bottleneck out of myself. So I'm kind of suppressing my team, and I'm also hindering myself from doing the good work. Where if I had that trust, and if I had the confidence in maybe my team member is going to do this a little clunky and awkward, and I can help them through that, and I can have the appropriate conversations as needed, and it might be a little bit of cleanup. That's okay. It's the psychological safety and the culture in the organization. Is it okay to make mistakes? And we learn along the way. And I need to support my team and pave that path and show people how it's done and set that example.
Thank you very much for that. Natasha, I see your hand is still up. I'll come back to you second if you've got another question, but Dr. Matthew, let's go for you first.
Yeah, so to sort of build a little bit off of what Jacqueline was saying, and when we look at aligning for engagement and the connection between employee alignment and employee engagement, the question around the resistance, there is a bit of that fear, and maybe that fear is part of the, they may gang up on me, but more likely what I've seen in my experiences is that it's not so much a fear as it is lack of a motivation to try something new. So why do I need to take initiatives, take risks? And doing something new takes tenacity. It takes boldness. It takes a different style of leadership that says, I'm willing to put my neck out there for something that I truly believe in. And there was an executive coaching conversation that I've had multiple times with a few different people, and it comes back to, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the phrase, nobody got fired for buying IBM. And that goes back to the 20, 30, 40 years ago, whatever, where it was about within companies, if you're buying the products or you're buying the software or the technology, IBM had a reputation for being very good. So it was a safe move to keep doing the same thing, even if there were better options, better alternatives, even if all the research said this other way is better. Nobody got fired for buying IBM. It was a low risk decision. And so when you have risk aversion decision making influencing how you lead your team, how you develop your employees and your organization, you're likely going to miss out on a lot of the opportunities that the research says if you do X, you will see increased engagement. Well, to do that is to do something different, and that means taking a risk. And managers, more often than not, prioritize their own job security and sort of a cover yourself over that newer and that riskier, bold move. That even though it's a risk, that there's so much benefit to it. But again, it's almost that aversion of, well, I like that idea, I'm on board with that, but I'm not ready to make that decision. I'll let somebody else make that decision. Before you know it, everybody's standing around saying somebody else can do it. Well, if nobody takes that first step, it never gets done. The problems perpetuate, and we end up back on these conversations saying this would be great if. So it's about how do we get that if to the happening, and I think a lot of it comes down to working with managers to develop their decision-making skills, and also reinforcing that organizational culture that says it's okay to take a risk. It's okay to try something, and if it doesn't go well, you're not going to get fired. Obviously within boundaries.
Yeah, it's safe to do what we've always done, but it'll lead you nowhere. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Matthew. Shawna, welcome to Work Cookie. Let's go to you.
Good morning. Yeah, this is definitely building on everyone's comments, the self-determination, the training, the uniqueness, and paving a new path. I think transparency is also in there, like going back to what LindaAnn said, like making sure that people understand really what the driving purpose is. There's a lot of kind of fear around that transparency, how much to give to get people aligned and engaged. But also that struggle of being in a leadership position, the expectations that come with that. So thinking they need to have all of the answers instead of asking, hey, what are the answers to this? So I think that's also a shift in kind of that mentality. I recently read an article about how HR is now swinging back to the advocacy since like the Civil War, and really trying to be there for the employees. So I think that leadership is going to have to lean into all of those things that have just been mentioned to kind of get that transparency and learning that culture of asking questions and making mistakes and it being a safe space.
Sean, I'd love to ask you, is there a role for creatives here? And the reason I ask that is a number of years ago, as I was working in post-secondary, and there was a decrease in funding from the government. So they called us all together and said, this is the situation. I love that they were open and honest with us. And then went, we need you, our faculty, to come up with ideas about how we can generate revenue. And I was working in the theater and film department at that time. And we're creatives. We had lots of ideas, but there was this attitude of, well, if you're looking to make money, you don't talk to the artists. So do we need to be a bit more open and really sort of engage with creatives for looking for these new ideas?
I think that absolutely, yes. I also do creative work. I dance, I paint, I do all of those things. And bringing that into the workplace has been an amazing intersection that I have seen a lot of creative resolution come into play by using that.
Go creatives. Thank you very much for that. And I'd love to see you dance sometime. Alexander, let's go to you.
Hi, Tom. I hope you're doing well. Jacqueline and Matthew brought up some really great points, and I see Lee also in the chat has made a really great point. Since everyone can't see the chat, I'll read Lee's comment real quick. Was sometimes it's definitely not safe to keep doing what we've always done when things start becoming flagged on audits or are determined to be contrary to law or regulation. That's such a very great point, and it kind of goes into what I'm listening to hear from others and also thinking myself is that for a lot of management, it almost becomes overwhelming, all of the problems that we have in companies and the things that we have to do. And it can definitely become fear motivated, not wanting to stick one's neck out and get the axe on it, right? Matthew made a great point on the IBM thing, and we see that all the time now. But just like kind of what happened with IBM, Microsoft came up and then it started companies falling behind, some companies closed. Yeah, you might not lose your job, but you might lose your employment altogether. So this is those aspects that we have to kind of look at, correct? Building up the confidence of our existing management and also helping them understand how to better manage their time. Private equity actually talks about this a lot on how a lot of management doesn't manage their time in the right methods. They spend too much time micromanaging essentially, and not enough time talking about the strategy or thinking about the strategy and how to get the company forward. And so if we can get the management to listen and feel more confident to make these decisions and build that culture that it's okay to make mistakes, that can be really powerful. There was just a podcast here last or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was now, on McKinsey about private equity and CEOs. And a lot of private equities trying to get companies to actually realize that you don't have to follow the stock market trend of trying to get 2-3% little gains here and there. If you actually will cut some stuff and be able to grow that away, that's even more helpful. And so it's just those little things to help people understand that, yeah, you can be confident. You don't have to focus the market trends. You can actually do things that are going to help your company in the long term.
Well, we've just discovered a way to make your company more profitable by 20%, getting them in line and engaged. So thank you very much for that. Rich, good to see you as always. Let's go to you.
Hold on 1 second, Tom. Can you come back to me just because
I
my phone's
can.
ringing?
You grab that
Thanks.
phone. I'll go to Natasha.
Hi, yes. So the quick comment that I wanted to make, and I think someone brought it up in terms of we see a lot of leadership being fearful of, driving strategy and taking action. And I think that a lot of that fear stems from the fear of them being discovered for not knowing what they're doing. Because as so many people mentioned before, a lot of and we've mentioned on other podcasts, is that a lot of people are great at managing their own work, as was mentioned earlier, but not great at managing people, which is a different skill set in and of itself. And it is twofold. One, maybe I can manage and streamline my own work, but when it comes down to managing people doing the work, it's a different ball game. And not everyone has been taught, or managers have been taught, to drive strategy, to create action plans. And a lot of people, a lot of leadership who are afraid to have those conversations or to put those topics or points in writing. It's a fear of not being discovered. And I think it goes back to the training, but most importantly, the fact that leadership needs better self-awareness of where they lack and being able to tap into team members that actually do have the experience. Because ultimately, having a great team member who has strengths in the areas that you have weaknesses does not weaken you as a leader, but it actually shows the strength that you are able to use the resources and the people that you have in order to create and drive effective action. And I think it goes back to larger conversations that we need to have, not just on this podcast, but also within organizations. And HR and IO, again, is the driving force with helping, leaders come to that realization. And when you think about the ladder, the top of the pyramid of leadership, when you think about the CEOs or all of the executives, a CEO is only as good as the executives around them. an executive is only as good as the middle managers and other senior managers that report into them. And that is generally where the pressure just starts trickling down and is bled into employees. And I think that a lot of the conversation should not be on how do we align employees or how do we get employees to be more engaged, but more importantly, what do we need to do at the higher levels to be able to not only train our own, but create a landscape for that safe and productive engagement to take place.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, hopefully leaders start to realize that their greatest asset are the people around them. Rich, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I think this plays into what Natasha's saying here. So I was glad to see in LindaAnn's references this reference to perceived organizational support, right? POS meant a totally different thing to me when I was younger and I had a beat up car. But I'm glad to see that that this has made its way into our conversation again, because I think there was an earlier episode, oh shoot, maybe 10 or more episodes back, where we talked about POS, and there was a study from the International Journal of Organizational Leadership that showed that POS it improves knowledge accessibility, learning capacity, leadership practice, career advancement, and employee job performance. So like all this stuff that we're talking about having, this sense of safety within the organization really comes out of like, we have to have those systems set up where people feel like they have the adequate support to be able to do what they do without that fear that's going to hold them back, if that makes sense. So
it does. Thank you very much for that. LindaAnn, over to you.
So there's so many great points that are being made. One comment I want to put out there is that for employees, while it's ideal that your leader goes through this process with you, that does that career development with you, that identifies all those particular goals and helps you understand the alignment and creates all that, you can also do that for yourself. If you can look at the website, find out what the purpose is, find out, ask somebody what the strategic goal, all those kinds of things, you can do it for yourself. And I did this for myself like 35 years ago, so that I understood my own purpose and how to move forward. So you're not a spectator in your own career process. You need to take some action and initiative if you're not getting it from somewhere else, right? It's not a passive process that you just wait around to be recognized, because that's a lonely process.
Right.
The other thing is, in regard to some of the comments about the fear of leadership and of taking on some of this initiative, is that some of it's just unfamiliar, right? And to step out of the familiar is a big deal. And a couple of times I've done this with executives, and when I say to them, we go through the process of identifying what the individual's career dreams are and plans and goals and all those kinds of things, it uncovers the opportunity for that leader to utilize that in giving up some of the responsibilities that are weighing them down, because this person actually wants to do that. All you have to do is give them the opportunity and coach them a little bit and get some of that stuff off your plate. Now, when I do that, I ask the executive if they're ready for a little chaos, because it will. At least once you start empowering people, it seems like a little chaos because they want to go. And now you have to understand that you are still in charge, but you're not in control, right? So, and so learning how to manage that ocean is a little different, but it's really exciting, and it's important to help all those employees understand that in this process that those leaders are learning too. So if everything's not going quite as smoothly as we'd like, there'll be some waves, but the lake will flatten out at dusk, right?
We hope. Not if I'm one of your employees, it won't. I'd love to ask you, LindaAnn, because not every organization has an IO psychologist on board, but they all pretty much have HR professionals. What's the opportunity for the HR profession to evolve here and change to help organizations align, to help people get engaged?
Well, I think one of and Natasha can probably has a really good opinion on this as well. It's our job, in my opinion, to spend a significant amount of time educating people on, and that's done in team meetings, it's done in your organizational quarterly meetings, it's done in individual conversations and process, but we're responsible for a lot of that education and helping them understand the value of it. I think that there is a real gap in how educated human resource people are on this process. Because I've been through the certification at the highest level and they didn't talk about it.
Wow. Well, maybe you need to introduce a new level. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Lee, let's go to you.
I'm gonna, step away from what I was thinking about there for a second because of something that LindaAnn just brought up. That, like, my current team is, I have a lot of contractors, so they work for me, but they don't work for me, right? They have a different employer, and so I am limited on my choice of carrots. So if I really want to encourage them to up their game, I have to be creative about that. And one of the ways that I do with my team, then this kind of goes back to what LindaAnn was saying, is giving opportunity. So there's a little bit of latitude in our, in the performance work statement. There's a little bit of latitude in job duties and what I can do with these people. And I can tell some of these guys, hey, look, you're doing great stuff. And as much as I would love to give you a bonus or a raise or whatever else, I mean, you work for another company. However, if you are interested, I have some opportunities to get you involved in some other things. That could be a resume builder for you, give you a little bit of experience, do something a little more interesting so you don't get bored. And so I allow them to kind of step into some other stuff, some projects or whatever else. I mean, they still got their main job they have to do, but maybe a little bit of their time they can put, be on these other initiatives, and they can learn some new skills, and they can have some new fodder for the resume, and they can do these things and not get bored. I mean, a lot of my guys are service desk guys, not the most glamorous or exciting job. I want you to stick around, so maybe I should find some things that I can do to sweeten the pot a little bit. So that's just one thing that I found that, when I am limited on the options, that has been worked really well. Actually, a lot of those guys are like jumping at the chance to get into some of these other things. But going back to what we said about the perception. So, the perception is the reality. And so you really have to make sure that you are managing that. And one way to do that is to listen to your people and to make sure that they feel listened to. Because, if you're just like, yeah, you may take into account what they say, but if they don't understand and recognize that, then it doesn't matter. If later on they're like, oh, well, I came up with this great idea and the boss took it and, put it off as his idea. Well, that's probably not the best way to win, win hearts. And one thing that we don't talk about a whole lot is whistleblowers. If there's a problem out there that you don't know about and somebody, raises that flag, listen. Don't persecute them, don't whatever. I mean, because most of the time, there is a legit reason they're bringing it up. Not always. People are people, but there's a legitimate reason they're bringing it up. They see something, something that's dangerous, something that's illegal, something that is maybe not illegal, but it's skirting the line, ethically. There's some things that are going to be bad press if it gets out, that's going to be damaging to your organization. I mean, there are lots of reasons that you don't see that one of your people has seen, and you really need to listen to them, and you need to make sure that they feel safe enough to come to you and tell you. Psychological safety, we talk about it, we beat on it, that drum a lot, but it is huge. They have got to feel safe enough to come to you, to know that you will listen, that you will take it into account, and if there's something that needs action, then that you will do your best to get it action. With the understanding that, if you're the middle guy, the top guys may be like, la, 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 they don't want to hear it. And you just have to, but you're going to have to give that, hey, look, I'm fighting the fight for you. I tell my people all the time, part of my job is to take the arrows for them. That's a large part of my job, is to filter out that BS, to make sure they have all the information they need, plus some, but to filter out the other stuff, because I'm not going to let people rain down on my people. That's my job.
Well, I want Lee to be my boss. Thank you very much, Lee.
I'd love to hire you, Tom.
Oh, what we could do together. Dr. Matthew, let's go to you.
Part of what I was hearing there with what Lee was talking about was a good leader who can recognize and adapt to the difference between employee alignment and engagement with the organization versus with their role or their career path or their career development. And I'd contend that, and he also talked about listening, and I'd contend a significant factor of that alignment and engagement conversation is really around communication and listening, not just hearing what they're saying, but listening to it. And that clear, consistent communication, whether it's of the organization's goals, the values, the why behind what we do, or why we do it, but also the written and verbal communication, the behavior, the leading by example. What is it that you demonstrate, and how are you communicating to your people that, yes, you are listening to them, you are seeking consistent feedback, you're recognizing the good that they're doing, even if it's a tough thing for them to do, like he was talking about with whistleblowers, whatever it may be, that communication, that listening, that engagement, it's not just it's not a one-way piece from how does the employee align and engage with the organization, but it's how to do all the aspects together align, and that recognition piece is really crucial for maintaining that alignment ongoing. The other piece that Natasha was talking about, what can we do to build that landscape, and really I think that a lot of it really just boils down to that simple communication and listening. Some LindaAnn was talking about being able to own that as the employee. And I think maybe a lot of those aspects can be done by the leadership, but really the alignment and the engagement works best when all parties are involved to whatever their extent that they are comfortable. And as that leader, if you're recognizing, hey, you know what, this person, let me ask questions and understand where they are and how they're doing. They may not want to be very communicative and involved. They may say, hey, you know what? My job is from this time to this time, I show up, I do it, and I go home, and that's okay. But being that leader that can have that conversation and be open to that feedback to really support that person's relationship with their organization or with their role. That's what's crucial. There's that communication and that collective piece on all parties involved.
Yeah, and if you give those people who, I work 9 to 5 and leave me alone, if you give them that opportunity, they might just see the whole workplace evolving and go, wait a minute, what am I missing here?
Right. Yeah.
Let me get involved. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Matthew. Alexander, back to you.
So I wanted to address something real quick for the audience that might be listening, who might not be kind of from the STEM field. I noticed one of these citations here is 338 pages long, which is quite intense for a lot of people. So I wanted to help them with understanding and digesting this information. So if you go to notebooklm.google, you'll actually be able to import all of these citations in there, start asking it questions about that. And you can start asking it questions based off of the topics we've discussed, and it will address that with those specific citations. And so that can be really helpful to understand and digest that type of really big document there. The next kind of piece, though, that I wanted to talk about was when we're talking about this confidence, if we look to research from like Forbes, they find that 95% of project initiatives fail within companies, and digital transformations, I think, are in something like the 80s or 90% just themselves. And when we look at a lot of the trends, we see programs or certifications that might not be really data driven. And being able to employ these, it becomes something that it's safe, it's secure, everyone uses it. We really do have to start addressing that aspect too. That's a spot almost anyone can start doing this, saying, hey, there's these methods that are data proven for us to be able to do these transitions. Can we explore doing this way instead? You might be able to start get your team to support those things. And those are just little steps that you can start to take now at basically almost any level and start building that culture towards a more data-driven organization.
Yeah, and your culture is so important. Thank you very much, Alexander. Jacqueline, back to you.
I love it that LindaAnn lifted up the truth that employees can do this work on their own. And I would like to expand that to say, if you are a leader, that you've been promoted into a role and you are not receiving the support like what we've talked about in your organization, that you too can go and get leadership training, get coaching. There's resources available. Invest in yourself, not just the time, but be willing to invest dollars in yourself, because you know, given that you choose the right resources and do your homework there, you will get the return on investment. And to professionals as well. As we were approaching the SIOP conference, I would often ask other IOs, are you going to SIOP? And something I heard a lot was, well, my company's not paying for it, so I'm not going. Well, my company didn't pay for it either, but I went because I'm willing to invest in myself. I want the connections, I want the learning. And just because my company did not fork over the money for me doesn't mean that my learning and development stops. I see that as my responsibility, and it kind of kills me when I hear that people are not developing just because somebody else isn't investing in them. So I'll
And
get
you
off
know,
that box.
well, I love what you said. And you know, if you're looking for assistance, Work Cookie, the podcast itself, is great advice. We put it out there every week, but I get to speak to a whole panel of people every week who are bright, intelligent, and know their fields. And if you need some advice, if you need help, reach out to the people of this panel. Here's the expertise. I guarantee you this is what you're looking for. So thank you very much for that, Jacqueline. Natasha, back to you.
Jacqueline, hopefully I can unkill you a little bit in saying that I understand there is the notion of you have to invest in yourself. And I think that there are different ways that employees invest in themselves. We have a lot of students that do attend podcasts and spaces such as these. We are here because we chose to take an hour away from our employer, not only to share our subject matter expertise, but to learn from others. And those are ways that we invest in ourselves daily, and more information is readily available online for people. However, when people say my organization is not paying for this training or this conference, we have to believe them, because not everyone has the financial means or the privilege to be able to afford that. Not a lot of people are being paid fair wages or even market value for their work. And so we have to hold space and honor those of the people who fall in those brackets, and also not understanding what is happening at home, et cetera. But, you know, I want to go back to the point that was discussed earlier about, you know, when we brought up HR, what HR can do differently. I think that, again, going back to Jacqueline's point, we want to be able to continue to invest in ourselves and, you know, do the training. But to a certain extent, if the work is being done to improve the organization, we also have to look towards the leaders to ensure that there is a review of who we have in our HR divisions. Are they adequately trained to have these conversations? One of the things that I always advocate is for better training in disability for HR, or mental health first aid kit for HR, because believe it or not, a lot of HR professionals still do not know how to have that conversation. And so I think that it's not necessarily seeing it as investing in an individual, but investing in the wellness of your overall organization, which brings to my second point, is that it was brought up earlier that HR is going back to, holding a advocacy role in organizations. The work of HR is beyond advocacy. The work of HR is strategy and people. And what we would like to see is more organizations seeing HR as a strategic partner in the role of developing the organization, ensuring that we are not just aligning people and engagement and purpose, but that we're aligning people, resources, and the work to ensure that we're having the right people doing the right work. And we involve HR in the conversations of how we go about budgeting for resources and headcount. And oftentimes, and even now more so than ever in this post-pandemic world, we're seeing more and more of HR being utilized as the cleanup in aisle 72 versus, and what can we do to ensure that we do not have a spill in the first place, and therefore no cleanup is needed. The other aspect of it is some organizations, some executives, the truth of it is the company does not get dinged financially, but their insurance does. And they pay for the insurance for those lawsuits. So to a point, or anything else that transpires. So to that point, there is a lack of accountability at the executive level that really needs some reckoning with. Because if we look at the numbers, if we look at the corporate landscape since COVID, we reckoned nothing at all. We're doing a lot of reverting back. And so how do we create that awareness, or even for executives who are curious, and if you're listening to this podcast, how can you, if you hear something on this podcast that you like from a specific individual, we have a lot of consultants on this line, how do you reach out directly? How do you engage with this group to understand, and how can I leverage your expertise to be able to better, the engagement levels within our organization, but most importantly, that we see our people for not just as a means to an end, but as people who are helping the ends meet.
Love that. Thank you very much, Natasha. LindaAnn, back to you.
So just to build on something that I think it was Natasha who said a little bit ago in response to, I think it was Shawna, but anyway, if there's an individual out there who is restricting their learning process because of financial means, many organizations have scholarships for conferences, certifications, all those kinds of things. So I know it's not easy to ask, but ask, because often there are ways for that financing to take place so that you're not held back from that because of a financial limitation. So that's one thing. And then what Lee was saying, listening to your people is really key. When I was in marketing and so forth, one of the keys, I'd done, full scale surveys and market research and all those kinds of things, and got the data back from the organization that did it. But my best market research was just listening to my clients and prospects, right? And my rule of thumb was, if somebody asked me for something that I didn't have, or the service didn't do something, whatever it was, they wanted something outside our scope, I would go, The second time I go, wow. And then by the third time I heard that, I needed to be doing it. That was my rule of thumb. By the third time I heard it, it was something that I needed to move on. And I think that that applies to within a workforce. You need to be really, and if you're going to ask a question about something, then you need to be willing to do something about it. Don't ask questions that you don't want answers to, right? And when you get the information on that 9 to 5er who just wants to go to work and go home and be with his kids or, whatever it is, that's important information as a leader as well, because you know what? We need those people too, because there's not enough room for everybody to be a leader. We need some people in the brave new world to be happy to be just doing that and get satisfaction from it because they get enough out of their life somewhere else. And that's a real important piece. And it's important to understand it so that you're not pushing those people into roles they don't really want.
Yeah, very well said. Lee, back to you.
And in usual LindaAnn fashion, she segued perfectly into what I was going to say. That it is so crucial, I mean, we've all heard the cliches, the right seat on the bus and all that kind of stuff. And, I think that two things, talking about alignment is, for one, I mean, hire internal, start there, because sometimes the person that the perfect person for the job you're looking for already works for you. And sometimes moving that person into something that they're maybe better suited to or more interested in is a way to not have them go somewhere else. We all know turnover is expensive, and then, you can still hire the external person to backfill the person that you just internally hired. So you can, it's not like you're going to necessarily be pulling people in just for a different position that might be better suited. And this goes back to the listening to your employees and what they want to do. And, that guy who wants to work, 9 to 5, crucial. You got to have people do the work. Not everybody can be in charge of the people doing the work. Somebody's got to actually do the work. And an important thing is that people's priorities change. Talking about what's going on in their personal lives and their families and all this kind of stuff. You may have just a crackerjack, manager who's been doing amazing things that maybe they're starting to slip a little bit. And so maybe you should ask them what's going on. And maybe they're burned out. Maybe they got a lot of stuff going on. Maybe they're distracted. It's not that they've all of a sudden become just a crummy employee. There's things happening. And sometimes people just want to change. And just because someone's a leader today doesn't mean they always want to be a leader. Because there are times where they say, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this. I mean, and Lord knows I can relate. When I retired from the Navy, I'm like, you know what, I'm kind of tired of dealing with people. I just want to be a sole contributor. And I got to do it for about 37 minutes before they went, you know what, we got another job for you. So, but sometimes taking that, that good manager and leader or whatever and saying, you know what, I hear you. And we still want your leadership. We still want your experience. But we don't want to lose you because we burned you out. So how about we pull you from that position and we put you, we make you a project manager, and you're gonna work with teams, or oh, you just got this great new certification in analytics. Well, okay, maybe would you like to be an analyst? We can move you over to do this thing. So just because someone is a leader doesn't mean they can't be a individual contributor at some point. And then maybe later on they decide, hey, look, I'm ready to jump back into the other swim lane. And you can do this. You can move the people around in your organization. It's like chess. I mean, you don't leave your chess pieces in the same place and win the game. You move them to where they're most, advantageous and strategic. You do the same thing with your people. And, in this world where it's unusual for people to be there for years and years and years, there are still organizations that are doing this. I mean, I work with people who have been with my organization, 20 plus years. which is unusual these days, but it happens because you shift them around to where they can be fulfilled and be the best contributor, and they don't get bored, and whatever the case may be. So, and I know we're coming up on time, so I'll wrap it up there. But talk to your people. Bye.
Well, thanks, Lee. And I love what you said. And one of the things I realized in my own life, and I think employers should sometimes consider, is when my daughters were out of the house, when they were off to university, all of a sudden I had so much more time on my hands. And it was like I could have taken on some new challenges, but I just watched more TV. But that's me. So thank you very much, Lee. LindaAnn, back to you.
So I want to point out, and I'm sure many people realize this, but make no mistake that doing this, taking the time to do that career development process, making sure they understand how it aligns with the organization's, purpose and vision and strategy, takes time, and it takes a lot of time. But it's worth the investment, because when you look at the fact that disengagement is costing companies in the United States $550 billion a year, you can't afford not to. In addition, one of the keys in good leadership is to really have that significant relationship with each of your employees. Taking the time to do this with them goes a long, long way. And when I've talked to people who take the time to do a good job with their performance reviews, and you look at how much time the individual puts into it, and you put an equal amount of time into it, and you have good discussions, and then you have this career development plan that aligns with the organization, and you integrate that into the process, the employees really appreciate the amount of time that it has taken to do that with them. And it might be, when you do your performance review, it might be a 2-hour time slot, and then maybe the hour it took you to do it, the actual form or whatever. But that's a 3-hour investment in a year, right? That you have something built that you can check in on, and it guides you the rest of the way. It's your script for the rest of the way, for the rest of the year as you work with them. So it may seem like, and the first time is the hardest time. So don't get discouraged when you go, oh, man, the first time is the hardest. The rest is just an iteration.
Yes, it certainly is. So thank you very much for that, LindaAnn. I see that next week, because we're almost out of time here, but I see that next week we're going to take it from your current employees to your prospects or future employees. We're going to look at leveraging statistic alignment to boost your recruitment efforts. So can you give us a little preview on that?
Sure. When you look at, you have all of this, you've done this whole process with your current team, right? And now you've really worked on getting engaged employees. That helps you in a lot of ways. One, it helps you communicate to your to your recruits what you do for them as an employer and how it can benefit them. When I would recruit, one of the first questions I asked them was, what was their dream? Right? I asked that right up front, because I wanted to know really, how would that fit into my current organization? So just going through that process from the get-go, were they going to be a good fit for the position I was looking for? Right. And then, and in one way, it would be, if I'm looking for a line person and I have somebody who has this huge aspiration to be the CEO of the company, I have to look at, is that a good fit for me right now? Right. So it helps in that way. Right. But it also is really attractive to recruits when they see that you're not just hiring them to fill a seat.
Wouldn't that be nice? So thank you for that. And Lee, I see you've got a pop-up happening tonight.
Yep, that's right. Same bat time, same bat channel.
And
6:30
are you getting any sleep, or are those continuing to go on till 2 in the morning?
Well, they go on past my bedtime, but usually I hand it off long before then. But yeah, as long as people are willing to stick around, I'm willing to keep the room open and let them do it. And there've been some really good and long conversations. I actually will not be there this evening. personally, today is my wedding anniversary, so they got a priority bump, and yes, thank you. Made it 26 years without her throwing me out or whatever. And but we do have some wonderful people who help me out who will be helping me this evening.
There you go. Well, thank you for that, and congratulations on your wedding anniversary and surviving 26 years. We have to meet your wife at some point. And if you're an IO psychology student who's listening to the Work Cookie podcast, don't forget we've got the IO psychology student meetup. That's happening on May 29th. And if you're looking for any information, just visit the CBOC website. And once again, we do this every Thursday at 12 Eastern, and we would love you to join us and share your views and share your voice here on the Work Cookie podcast. And with that, so I don't mumble anymore, LindaAnn, I think it is time for us to close out this episode of Work Cookie. So if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
Thanks everyone for having this lively conversation with us. We'll see you next week. 3, 2, 1.